San Diego leaders paddle upstream in a river of denial, but we may all be better off if the Chargers leave for L.A. The impact of solitary confinement on juveniles can be grave, yet a bill to ban the practice in California faces opposition from jailers and probation officers. And a proposal to build an overpass above a congested stretch of Route 94 draws fire from environmentalists and community members. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are business columnist Dan McSwain of the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Mark.
It's good to have you back. Freelance criminal justice writer Kelly Davis. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Mark.
Glad you're here today. And reporter Joshua Emerson Smith of San Diego City Beat. Hi, Joshua.
Good to be here.
Well, San Diego leaders appear to be working feverishly to keep the Chargers here, and Mayor Kevin Faulconer believes the city's offer to the team is a good deal for everyone. Here's what he said about it recently on KPBS Evening Edition.
Yeah, and while I can't control what's going on in Los Angeles, certainly all of our efforts is controlling our own destiny here in San Diego, and a lot of positive momentum that continues to build, and rightfully so. And my commitment is that we have a real plan at a real site, and most importantly, a financing mechanism that works for San Diegans.
All right, so Dan, is this a good deal for San Diego? Your column would suggest otherwise.
Well, I'm trying to look on the bright side. The Chargers have left the negotiating table, apparently not to return until they've fully pursued moving to the Los Angeles market. And so I started doing some research about what would be the economic upside if we didn't build a brand new professional football stadium. And it turns out that the research is overwhelming. Football stadiums in particular, sports stadiums in general, are, when it just comes to dollars and cents, not the emotional and tangible part, are a bad investment of public dollars. They either have zero return or usually negative return.
All right, and we'll get to that intangible in a minute, but I did want to ask you, we should remind people, the plan now calls for this venue to be $1.2 billion to build it here, and how much of that is public money, and then we want to get to how much is really hidden money.
Well, the market is set by the Minnesota deal, which was essentially 50-50. So at least my opinion is that the Chargers would not settle for anything less than 50% public participation. So that gets you to $600 million at least. Now, there was a very careful study in 2002 by a University of Michigan professor who found that when you look at the entire project, there's generally 25% additional hidden costs. Everything from lost tax revenues, debt service, policing overtime, upkeep, maintenance. So that 25% of $1.2 billion, that gets the public cost ultimately up to about $900 million.
And what can we buy with $900 million besides our share of a football stadium?
Well, all kinds of stuff. I used the example of the toll road that was purchased, and I'm spacing out the number. It was a little over $300 million. Mm-hmm. And that was on 125 South County, relieved a lot of congestion. Yes, that was a toll road that was struggling, and Sandag bought it. Mm-hmm. And this is relieving millions of trips a year from 805 potentially.
Yeah, daily frustration for drivers throughout that region. Yeah.
And then there's Senator Marty Block, who has been pushing the idea that if the Chargers do leave, he's not out there in public saying I want them to leave, but if they do leave, in his view and in the view of a lot of other folks I've talked to, the highest and best use for the Qualcomm site would be to fund an expansion of our very own San Diego State University. Right,
because as you noted in your column, they can't really accept it's been kind of flat admissions for several years. So you're saying in the long run that would be more educated people, more entrepreneurs, more people starting up businesses, and just we'd benefit in the long run.
Well, economic analysis is always about what they call opportunity cost. Instead of spending money this way, what would it be? Would it be better or worse to spend it a different way? And if the leaders came together and used an SDSU expansion to actually boost enrollment above the current plan, that could have huge economic benefits for the region that goes on for decades.
But what about jobs? Now, construction means new jobs. Keeping the Charger here means NFL jobs every season. Isn't that a big positive effect on the economy?
Well, absolutely. There's every economic study starts out with that have looked at stadiums says, of course, there's going to be one-time construction jobs, And of course, when a stadium's open, there's going to be sales activity, and that certainly helps a lot of people. However, when you look at the public money that was invested in that direction and compare it to what else you can do, almost anything else you do generates more economic activity than a sports arena. They're not used very often. Most of the jobs are relatively low paid. The millionaire players often live outside the community, or they save a lot of their money and don't spend it in the economy. So there's a lot of very good fundamental reasons why, in terms of public policy and investing taxpayer dollars, sports arenas just don't pencil out in dollars and cents.
Now, I want to do, and I'm going to throw this out to the panel, I think of a city like Detroit, shrinking rapidly, had the bankruptcy, of course, troubled economically. They built new downtown homes for the Lions and the Tigers with public money. They're building a Red Wings arena for the hockey team right now. How important are those franchises to the people of Detroit or Philadelphia or other big sports cities or seen as sports cities compared with San Diego? How do you value what it's like to be part of a big city, big league team? Kelly, is that important to you to be a resident of a big league city?
Well, I lived in Boston for a few years, and I caught the Red Sox fever. I actually still love the Red Sox, but the Chargers.
Not so much.
They can go. I don't think it would have much of an impact.
Well, and Joshua, what do you think? Is it important to people a sense of civic pride?
Yes, I was actually just going to use that phrase. There's like a civic energy or pride around it, right? And it seems like a lot of people in San Diego do feel that. I mean, you see that a lot with the opinion polls and different things. For me personally, I never connected with the Chargers. I don't know why. Like, I've connected with some other sports teams, so I don't know if there is something to the specific sports team. Some resonate, some don't.
Haven't polls showed that not a lot of people would be too upset if the Chargers left? Well,
a Union Tribune Channel 10 poll that was a good scientific poll found in May that 72% of all San Diegans probably are Chargers fans. However, a poll that we did in January before the standoff in negotiations found that about 30% or less would be willing to actually use taxpayer dollars toward a stadium. So there's a big difference.
That's the rub. Now, it's interesting in your column, you try to quantify this civic pride idea, this resident of the big league town, and can you put a value on that?
Hey, I've written a lot about this since January, when things started moving quickly around this issue. And in every case, I've said that, cities and the public, they do things that aren't economically valuable sometimes. They do all kinds of stuff for the intangible emotional value, like a park or a library. I mean, libraries aren't an investment. On the other hand, there are economists that over years have tried to measure how people value intangibles, and they do that through surveys. And it turns out, with a variety of careful studies, professional sports stadiums, if you measure the value that people put on having their taxes increased, it generally adds up to about 20% of the total cost. So we do value professional sports, but not enough to pay for them in most cases.
Now, we've got a short time left. I did want to ask about the city leaders are rushing ahead with an environmental study of this site in Mission Valley, the current Qualcomm Stadium site. The cost of that is, I think, a little over $1 million. Is that right?
$2.1 million.
$2.1 million.
It's been allocated,
much more than $1 million. Yeah. So is that going to be a waste of money if the Chargers do leave, or can that be used for some other development on that site? Is that still a useful study?
Well, the box that the mayor has put himself in is that this EIR applies only to a professional football stadium on that site. And critics, Corey Briggs, the attorney, is a prominent critic, says that the city is now embarking on exactly the mistake they made with the convention center expansion, where they ended up spending 4 years and $10 million for a pursuit that, in his view, was fruitless.
It was a folly. One last note here from Joshua.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Spending all this money seems like we haven't seen the mayor really go after anything as hard as he's gone after the Chargers. What's at stake politically for him if they leave?
Well, my guess is that his political folks, and he does have political advisors on staff, on his regular staff, that helped him win the special election, they would love to see this whole thing kicked beyond the June 2016 primary. So, can they appear to be in the game without landing hard on either side until after the next election? That's kind of what their job is.
That's my assessment.
A little bit of a tightrope. All right, we'll be watching all of that as we move forward. Well, we'll shift gears now. Placing prisoners in solitary confinement has been described as cruel and unusual punishment, even torture. So it may surprise you to learn that juvenile offenders are punished with solitary confinement, even in California. Now, a bill by State Senator Mark Leno, which is now in the California Assembly, would put a stop to this practice. Kelly, start by telling us how the solitary confinement is defined for juveniles under this bill. The definition is important.
So a quick shout out to the, I wrote this story for the Crime Report and John Jay University in New York, and it's a great resource for criminal justice stuff, so go check them out. Under the bill, solitary confinement would be defined as anytime a juvenile detainee is placed in a locked room with minimal contact from staff or attorneys or nurses or doctors. If they're in there for longer than 4 hours, then that's when it becomes solitary confinement. So this bill would ban the use of punitive solitary confinement and would limit the time a juvenile can be in a locked room to a maximum of 4 hours. And
you wrote about this lawsuit in Contra Costa County near San Francisco, and that highlighted the discrepancy in these definitions, right?
Right. Yeah. You'll find that the probation departments that run the county facilities, the prison guards union, whose members run the state juvenile facilities, they really don't like. They call it room confinement. They call it administrative segregation, timeout. When you bring up the term solitary confinement, they cringe and they say that's not what we're doing. But with the Contra Costa lawsuit, the two public interest law firms that handled that found that kids were being locked in a room, sometimes 23 hours a day. I think one kid was in there for about 100 days straight. So this is happening. Now,
in San Diego, bringing it back here, you did a story recently on City Beat about the solitary confinement here in juvenile lockups, and that started with an investigation into use of pepper spray. What did you find?
The Youth Law Center, which is based in San Francisco, had gotten some reports that there was excessive pepper spray use going on in San Diego County juvenile halls. So they came down here, did their own investigation, and found that pepper spray and solitary confinement would go hand in hand. You'd have a suicidal, one case that really stuck in my head, a suicidal young girl. She was asked to strip, to put on a safety smock. She refused because there was a male guard nearby. So for her resistance, she was pepper sprayed, and then she was given, I believe it was 48 hours of locked room confinement.
Wow. And how are they confined specifically? Trying to get that vision in my mind.
Right. I don't think it's in California. I don't believe you're seeing the kind of Rikers Island type, dank, dark cells. But these are rooms, and sometimes everything is removed. The youth will be allowed maybe a book or a Bible, a blanket, and nothing else. It all depends on kind of the level of isolation they're placed under. But it's not as inhumane as we might think when we think of solitary confinement, but it is harmful for a young person's mind because they need that interaction.
All right, and as I said earlier, the sponsor of this bill, the advocate, is Democrat Mark Leno from San Francisco. For a radio audience, I'm going to read this. Solitary confinement, this is his definition, is an extraordinarily harmful disciplinary measure that has no rehabilitative purpose whatsoever. This type of isolation is widely condemned, only exacerbates the problems troubled youth face. We must provide them with treatment, not prolonged isolation. So that's the crux of it on the advocate's side. So generally, what is the opposition to this? What you touched on this earlier, but the prison guards and probation officers, what do they see as useful about this technique?
They want to have this tool for kids who are really uncontrollable, really unruly. The prison guards unions say they're currently under a consent decree for the state-run facilities because conditions there in the mid-2000s were so awful and got a lot of really negative press coverage. So they're saying, hey, we're making improvements. Don't come in and add this other layer of regulations. But the federal monitor, who has to kind of make sure this consent decree is being enforced, she found that there were kids who were still being locked up longer than they have to be out of their cell for at least 44 hours a week, and she found kids that were being that weren't getting that minimum out of cell time. So they're saying, don't give us another layer of regulations. Probation departments are saying, just let us still have this tool if we need it.
Okay. Is this, I'll throw this out to the panel, is this something that surprises you? Were you aware that kids were treated this way in juvenile lockups?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm definitely aware of this. I've reported on it, too, for years now. I mean, this
Do you think the general public is aware of it?
I don't know. I don't know if they are. I think that solitary confinement is a really heavy issue, and I mean, I've interviewed people, adults and juveniles, that have experienced it, and no matter how hardened a criminal they are, everyone always says, I would never wish it on my worst enemy.
Okay. And the transparency about this practice, that's a problem in this issue as well, is it not?
It's not tracked. I even tried to get numbers from the San Diego County Probation Department, and they don't track it. So at least that's what they told me. So you should know. They should at least know who's getting locked up for how many hours, why. Because as one of my experts said, because once you got that data, you could begin to understand your problem a lot better.
The scope of it.
Yeah, and address it. Yeah.
Josh?
My question is, what is the prison guards union, what are they most concerned about? Do they feel like, do they say it's just going to be chaos if we don't have this tool, or?
It's just they want to have it for the worst of the worst. But experts say that those kids are worst of the worst because nobody's sat down to figure out the underlying problem, like
right.
what's causing you to act out. And that's difficult. It's going to take more training, but it's possible. Other states have been able to totally eliminate solitary confinement without any additional problems, without guards getting hurt. So.
Now, you cite in your reporting a 2009 Justice Department study of juvenile detainees who committed suicide. What did they find in
There's a very strong link between solitary confinement and suicide. I can't remember the exact number. I think it was about 2/3 of youth who committed suicide in detention facilities were in solitary confinement. And then there's also a lingering effect of youth who have experienced solitary confinement or are more likely to commit suicide.
All right, let's end with the status of Leno's bill here. What's happening with that?
It's moving on to the Assembly Appropriations Committee. I don't think there's a date set yet, but that's the final step before a full Assembly vote, and if it makes it to there, I think it's in good shape. Okay. And it'll make California the 21st state to ban juvenile solitary confinement.
And the governor has indicated he would sign this then?
That's a really good question. That's the one thing that I'm not sure.
There's your follow-up.
But Mark Leno, and Mark Leno he's got a lot of clout. He's well respected
within the Democrats and in the legislature. All right, we're going to move on. It's a plan to add an elevated ramp for buses and carpooling along a congested stretch of State Route 94 east of downtown San Diego. And this project brings into sharp relief a highly contentious debate: more cars or more public transit in our region. Joshua, start to lay the land for us. What's the stretch we're talking about, and how congested is it?
Yeah, so if you can imagine, if you can kind of picture this, this is the 805, Interstate 805, south of Highway 94 going into downtown, and they want to build a ramp coming off of 805 and onto 94 going into downtown. The ramp will be for high occupancy vehicles, so buses, carpool lanes, potentially a toll road. That's not off the table. And that ramp will then touch down somewhere on the 94 before it goes into downtown. And
go ahead. Finish the line.
When it touches down onto 94, what they proposed is building 2 more express lanes, one going into downtown and one coming out. And then that would be the project. Okay, so it's supposedly going to release this bottleneck, this congestion there, and shore up this old freeway. We do have a clip here from Gustavo Gallarda of Caltrans. He talked to KPBS Evening Edition about why he thinks this needs to be done.
The main goal of this project is to provide more options to commuters by allowing carpools and transit to use these lanes. But it also to provide some badly needed operational and safety benefits by improving the way that 94 runs. It was an old freeway that was built in the late 50s.
All right, and we'll get the other side of that in a second, though. This is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars to do this plan. Where does that money come from?
That's part of Transnet. That's the sales tax. This is part of the regional transportation plan for Sandag. That's the ever-evolving large plan for the entire region that's actually being contested in the California Supreme Court right now for not being environmentally friendly enough.
All right, so we heard from the Caltrans fellow there a moment ago. Not everybody's crazy about this. Let's hear from Monique Lopez of the Environmental Health Coalition. She doesn't like the idea.
But as the plan stands, it begs the question, how are we going to achieve our climate action plan goals when you have freeway widening happening through the heart of the city that doesn't even allow for one single transit stop along that entire corridor for that community to access?
All right, so what's she talking about specifically here? Obviously, this thing would kind of fly over several communities there east of downtown.
Right, so north is Golden Hills, south is Sherman Heights. These are the areas represented by council members Todd Gloria and David Alvarez. And the advocates have said you're going to widen the freeways, which is going to increase pollution in the area from construction, but also from an increased traffic from cars. And yet we don't even get a bus stop in our area. So if I want to go north using the bus rapid transit, I've got to go all the way downtown to catch that. And it just makes it infeasible for a lot of commuters.
Yeah. So it does, as I said at the open here, this really gets to the heart of this whole, planning going forward. Are we going to just have more cars and more the Southern California way, the car culture, or are we at some point going to transition off, burn less fuel, and get more people in buses?
That's what's so fascinating about this particular stretch, right? You might look at this and say, well, it's just one small piece of this huge puzzle of the regional transportation plan, but really, this is a microcosm or an example of what is being debated throughout the entire county. Are we going to do projects that prioritize public transit, or are we going to expand freeways? Now, if you listen to Caltrans and Sandag, they say we want to create projects that provide alternatives for everyone. So they say that that's been pretty much their line the entire time. We want to widen freeways, but also then do public transportation at the same time. The advocates say, no, that's not going to get us to our climate goals. And so for this particular project, they're saying, hey, why don't we look at when these lanes touch down onto 94, rather than building new lanes, why don't they touch down onto existing lanes, restripe those lanes as HOV lanes? The congestion's not really that bad, they argue, especially compared to places like LA. And if there is a little congestion, well, that might motivate some people to switch over to taking the bus rather than driving.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, of course, with transportation planning is that it takes place over, used to be 10 years, now it's more like 30 years. And if you look at the catastrophe that is Interstate 5 in North County, you're seeing the shortcomings of public officials 20, 30 years ago. And in fact, the de minimis widening that they're doing up there is not even going to be finished for 30 years, and at which point the congestion's projected to be even worse. So it's an interesting problem, and HOV lanes and bus lanes are, with a double-decking system, is the most expensive way to get people around. Buses are cheaper. Open access lanes are cheaper. Now, in my view, Gary Gallegos, the head of Sandag, is one of the smartest public officials in California, because federal and state law requires these kinds of really expensive investments without enough funding. So he has been successful in turning them into rapid bus lanes, carpool lanes, and toll lanes, so that if you want to pay some money, you actually have an open access freeway that will actually move vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Is that working in some places here? Orange County, I think.
Interstate 15 is a model that's being studied all over the world. Mm-hmm. And it has time variable pricing, and when it's really congested, the price goes up. Mm-hmm. The City of London is doing this because they've failed to make sufficient investments over decades. Mm-hmm. So if it's really crowded, it costs you a bunch of money to come into the City of London, just like it costs more on a congested day to come down I-15 in the carpool lanes.
So the interesting thing about this is what the advocates are saying. Let's have a public conversation about this. Let's get this in the environmental review document. So let's have these alternatives studied alongside what you've already proposed. Then we can have a public debate about it. We can look at the impacts as studied by Sandag and Caltrans. And then we can talk about it. Right now, they're not even in the environmental documents. And that's why, through public pressure, 4 city council members and Assembly member Lorena Gonzalez submitted letters to Sandag saying, hey, why don't we just study this?
Short time left here. Where does the project stand now? What's the next step?
We're waiting for the environmental review document, which has been delayed multiple times now, and we'll see when that comes out if it does include things like adding a bus stop or reducing the size of the project.
Okay, well, we'll also see, and I'm sure you're going to do a lot more reporting on whether this does become the line in the sand and one of those emblematic projects that gets at this issue.
Exactly.
Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Dan McSwain of the San Diego Union Tribune, freelance criminal justice writer Kelly Davis, and Joshua Emerson Smith of San Diego City Beat. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.